If you enjoy the following clip from my podcast, please like, subscribe, and head over to the full episode of The Backseat Fighter, the most honest, most thoughtful, and certainly the best MMA podcast in the game. My name is Charles Binns. Thank you for watching.
So this week's discussion is about pit culture in MMA fandom and in MMA media. And now you might be saying, that's super hypocritical. You just spent half an hour making your picks for the upcoming UFC fight night. Well, that is true. But I hope that you guys can see that I'm doing it with a certain nuance and a certain objective and a certain level of detail, effort, and analysis and research that, these are informed picks. And again, like I just said with Mike Malo, these picks are not anything to do with, whether or not a fighter wins or not, should not affect whether you are a fan of them or not necessarily, right? So this is where I want to kind of go with it. And we're just going to go through, maybe half an hour, maybe less, about why I think pit culture is pretty much a big problem in MMA media and MMA fandom in general. I think the biggest reason, and we'll kind of weave our way into it, the biggest reason I find it as a problem is that it takes away from the appreciation of these fighters. And this channel is entirely about uplifting fighters, appreciating them, humanizing them, and how that can make us bigger fans and better journalists of the sport, right? When you go on and you are like an average fan and you're setting your parlay and the fighter in the main event that you picked at the end of your 5-leg parlay doesn't win, and now you're starting to call that fighter washed, or he's a horrible fighter, or it's somehow his fault, right, for not winning, then we start to get into a murky area, right, where we're not even looking at these fighters as humans who have just gone through a 12-week fight camp, who have just cut weight, who have made all of these sacrifices, who haven't spent as much time with their loved ones as they would have liked. All of these hardships that they've gone through, maybe they've got injuries, maybe they've had personal issues that they haven't been able to use as reasons to pull out the fight, or they've gone along with the fight anyway. They've put their life on the line for your entertainment. And then we start hearing, the abuse that's come along with all of this stuff, right? And I'm not even blaming sports gambling or, anything like that. I'm not doing that at all. I am saying that it's on the responsibility of individuals to not go there. The flip side of that is what I really wanted to talk about is fans taking fighters' victories as their own. So a lot of the times, fans will make picks and it's always an I told you so type of moment, right? Like, this is not the way for me to appreciate fighters or the sport in itself. We can't be making predictions based on the motivation to be right or the motivation to tell others that we're right, because that just takes away from who actually did the thing. It wasn't you because you were able to look at the fight and say, I think he's going to win, that somehow you're now sharing necessarily in that success of that fighter. No, that was on the fighter, that was on the fight camp, that was on the training they did, all the recovery, all the dieting, all the weight cutting, all the sacrifices they have made. That's the fighter's success. And I think there is a clear division that needs to be made so that when a fighter wins, we're not taking credit as journalists or fans for their success and their victory. And we're not blaming them as kind of, it's not like, it's kind of like this kind of paradox, right? Fans and journalists will take credit if they guess the fighter winning correctly, but then we'll instantly kind of like blame them, and there's hate comments and abuse for when they lose. So it's all on the fighters if they lose, but it's kind of like a shared victory if they win. So I think that's kind of what a lot of fighters probably feel, and why they feel like MMA fans are so fickle, especially in the media as well. Like, they probably feel that media is so fickle. But this is where I want to kind of nuance this discussion, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't be fans of fighters. I've got Max Holloway, I've got Alex Pereira and Izzy on the wall here. I've got a canvas lying over there waiting to go up on the wall that's got Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz on it. So I'm not saying do not follow these fighters, do not be happy when they win. Obviously, like, I was sad that Max Holloway lost because I'm a big fan of his, but I will never, I guess my point is, now that Max Holloway has lost, I'm not a fan of him. And I'm not now saying, damn, he lost and I think he's washed and he should retire instantly, which I feel like a lot of these fighters get as soon as they lose, especially if they have been on top for a long time. I think probably for me, the biggest, most recent example is obviously Max Holloway. People calling for him to retire. If your basis for calling for Max to retire is because you're worried about the amount of damage he's taken over his career, obviously he's absorbed the most strikes in UFC history, and he's obviously just kind of suffered quite a harsh knockout for the first time in his career. If that's your motivation for thinking Max should retire, it's understandable at least. If you're looking out for fighter safety, I completely there with you for that. I think, Max a long time ago could have said, if he was done for the sport, he could have said, I'm done, and walked away with a great legacy. And that's, Max deserves the ability to go out on his own. But if you're now saying Max is washed, he can't hang with the best, he's now washed because he got knocked out by Ilia Topuria. These are the things that pit culture and fans taking fighters' performances, victories and losses as kind of their own things, taking away that value. And I guess I want to say like taking the agency away from the fighter, taking the voice, taking the importance away from the fighter onto themselves. If that's your basis, if you're saying he's now washed and he can't hang with the best of them, that he shouldn't maybe move up to 155 and explore his options there, then I just simply disagree with you. And I think that you're contributing to negativity in the sport. I think another big example of this recently is Kamaru, the Nigerian nightmare Usman. I mean, for me, when I was watching Kamaru in those fights against Colby Covington and those fights against Jorge Masvidal, when he beat Tyron Woodley to get the title, I mean, a lot of people are saying if he keeps this up, he's going to be the greatest welterweight of all time, right? So we're saying somebody is one of the greatest fighters of all time in Kamaru Usman, which is still a fact. But obviously he gets, after dominating, or I want to say dominating and beating Leon Edwards, my fellow countryman, for a long time in Utah, in Salt Lake City, he obviously gets head kicked, right? Great head kick, great moment. Love that for Leon Edwards. Love that for my country as an MMA region. Obviously, I was to be honest, I was sad to see Usman like that. You never want to see one of these great champions be head kicked, knocked out like that. Just because it was such a vicious knockout that you don't know if somebody's going to be the same after that. In terms of, for me, again, it's not about their fighting ability, as in terms of a person, like how is that going to affect you on a human level? I think Kamaru has spoken about depression after fights, both after victories and the come down from the adrenaline and the dopamine hit and the serotonin, but also obviously after losses, how hard is it to get back on your feet, to get back in the gym, etc. But getting back to the main point, everyone said now then when he rematched Leon Edwards for the third fight in London, which I actually had the privilege of going to, after that fight, he's washed. No, he's obviously just taken a huge knockout and come back and fought the same guy just a matter of months later, right? And, he didn't have a terrible performance in that fight. He didn't get knocked out again, did he? And, he was able to stay in that fight, and obviously he lost the decision, and probably so, right? Probably a correct decision. He then comes in on 9 days' notice. So this is my problem, right? Everyone then goes, okay, so Kamaru Usman's washed. He's not that good anymore. But then he comes in on 9 days' notice against Khamzat Chimaev and, obviously loses the first round. I think it was a 10-8, loses the second round, but then wins the third round off of 9 days' notice. Obviously has knee problems as well. He's not been in training camp. And for him to come in and have that performance, building in the third round, and everyone thinking, if this fight goes to a fourth and fifth round in a hypothetical situation, Usman could probably win that fight, right? So at what point was he washed? Was he washed after the Leon Edwards head kick? Was he after the headshot dead moment? Was he washed after the third fight in London? Or when did he become unwashed? Or is he still washed even though he was competing against Khamzat? And we've seen what Khamzat does to everybody else. So I think for me, that's such a relevant point. And, again, obviously, as I said in the last episode, one of my favorite fighters is Adesanya. People think he's washed now because of the Dricus du Plessis performance and the Sean Strickland results, right? But his performance in the DDP fight was solid. You know, I thought it was, you know, a pretty even fight. I think he was having success on the feet. And as I've said, it was just a lapse of judgment, a lapse of concentration for that 1 millisecond that cost him the fight. But there is no way you could say that Izzy Adesanya is a washed fighter. And I think this pit culture, taking the credibility or taking the credit away from fighters for when they win, kind of sharing that between fans and media, and sort of putting all the blame on them when they lose, I think it creates this sense of this tension and this immaturity in the way we view fighters. These fighters make unimaginable sacrifices for these fights. And it's not just in the UFC. We were supposed to have somebody on the show today, an MMA champion in another division, a welterweight champion, and he wasn't able to make the show, even though we had organized the interview, because completely fair enough, he's going through the weight cut right now, and he's in a camp for a fight in 2 weeks. These fighters go through immense sacrifice. So the pit culture that we have, taking the credit away from fighters for when they win, and kind of trying to share it between all of us, I think all it does is kind of produce this toxic environment in MMA fandom and especially in MMA media, where we just need to refocus what the sport is about. More than anything, it's about the fighters. Listen, the UFC does a great job of providing a platform for these fighters. The UFC is the best by far in the world. But again, Dana White will tell you it would be nothing without the fighters, right? So, you know, that's going to end off my discussion this week. I kind of got a little bit impassioned there and got a little bit riled up, but it does kind of affect me when I see fans kind of taking this approach to predicting fights. Listen, I'm a huge fan of a lot of the fighters on this card. I'm hoping Mike Malone wins. I'm hoping that, you know, Denise has a good performance. I mean, that Derek Lewis-Denise fight, you know, either one of them could win and it's going to be a great fight for the fans. And I'm hoping Moreno wins. But if they don't, it doesn't change how I look at them. It doesn't change the human side of these fighters, the amount of sacrifice, and it doesn't change the value of the work they put in. The result of their fight doesn't change how much they put into that camp, you know, unless they did the early John Jones days where he was out partying every week, you know, then you could probably point to that and say, well, you didn't put your all into it. But many of these fighters put every single last drop of blood, sweat, and tears into their fight camps for the victory on the night. And I think that's something we have to recognize. So yes, no to pit culture in terms of the popular sense at the moment, and no to fans taking fighters' wins as their own. Support these fighters regardless of their wins and losses. Talk about their fights, whether they're in the UFC or not. And, you know, I'm going to be having an interview with somebody who's not in the UFC yet, but an up-and-coming fighter this weekend. So look for that on the next episode. And hopefully we do get that MMA champion on next week or even after his fight in the next couple of weeks. So